Welcome, everyone. I'm Heather Biro, Director of Principia Lifelong Learning, and I'm so happy to be joining you today for the third event in our summer session online program. We began the week with a fascinating discussion led by Dr. Shirley Paulson on the Gospel of Thomas, Part 1. We're all excited for Part 2 with Shirley on Thursday. We then ventured back to the year 1888 with Susie Ledbetter, as she provided the context and history of the art that emerged from the friendship, collaboration, and rivalry between Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin. We learned a lot on that one too. And today, you're in for a truly joyful experience in commemoration of one of the greatest composers of all time, Ludwig van Beethoven. Through a combination of lecture and concert, Dr. Marie Jureit-Beamish, along with some special guest appearances, will pay tribute to the great master, bringing to life Beethoven's triumphant message that celebrates the power of joy. Many of you have already watched Part 1 with Marie, but for those who are joining us for their first time, please allow me to introduce our speaker. Dr. Marie Jureit-Beamish is an honorary alum of Principia and is a Principia College Professor Emerita of Music. She began teaching at Principia College in 1978 and served on the faculty until retiring in 2014. She's earned music degrees from UC Berkeley, Stanford University, and Yale School of Music. During her tenure at Principia, Marie conducted the college orchestra and taught a wide variety of music courses, including a famous course on Beethoven. She's a member of the Principia Lifelong Learning faculty, teaching at summer session and having served as trip lecturer on several European trips. And in case you're interested, Marie will be lecturing on the Principia Lifelong Learning Japan in Bloom cruise next April. More information is available online at principia.edu trips. We'd love for you to join us on what will no doubt be an incredible educational adventure around Japan in 2022. Again, a warm welcome to you all. I'll now turn the screen over to Marie.
Welcome back to Beethoven, Ode to Joy. Beethoven is my lifelong friend, and we are so happy that you are with us today for Principia Lifelong Learning Summer Session. We look forward to that day of being together again. We missed 2020, we're now missing 2021, and we are looking forward to 2022. Beethoven will always be with us, and I will be with you too. In 2020, we celebrated the 250th year of Beethoven, the great master. Just to review very briefly, we have already acknowledged the towering strength, courage, and extraordinary expressive powers of Beethoven, the revolutionary and romantic spirit. Let's all also recall the year 1802, when Beethoven wrote his deeply personal letter to his brothers, now called the Heiligenstadt Testament, in which Beethoven anguishes over the loss of his hearing and the ultimate driving force of his art to surmount the devastating affliction to a composer. In the first lecture, you heard one of my students perform an early piano sonata in the key of C minor. The stormy key also heard in Symphony No. 5 with its driving fate motive. Short, 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 long. In spite of his personal idiosyncrasies, it is ultimately his music that speaks heart to heart, as in the deeply moving and expressive Adagio cantabile of the Pathetique Sonata that I shared with you as the final word from Beethoven in the first talk. Now that we are all caught up, Beethoven and I are both ready to continue our journey into the vast realm of Beethoven, the man, and his music. This talk is divided into 3 parts, similar to the 3 clearly divided stages of Beethoven's creative output, or 3 style periods. Part 1 occurs from the time Beethoven grows up in the classic tradition of Mozart and Haydn, and he is clearly mastering the prevailing style, albeit with his unmistakable, innovative expression and romantic spirit. After growing up in Bonn, Germany, and embracing elements of enlightenment, that is, the emphasis on reason and individualism rather than tradition, Beethoven clashes head-on when he enters Vienna in the late 18th century. This style period is marked by the date of the Heiligenstadt Testament in 1802, when Beethoven is just 32 years old. So that will be the point at which I discuss Beethoven entering Vienna as a pianist. Style period number 2 coincides with the celebration of Beethoven with a performance of the Sonata in F-sharp major by Lindsay Garretson, in which I give you an insight as to how a musician explores the world of Beethoven's music. Style period 2 is marked by a long stretch of one great masterwork after another, such as some of the most revered symphonies, innovative string quartets, and so on. Beethoven was determined to prove that deafness was no handicap to him. These were all works that are the most familiar and popular to audiences around the world today. In addition to a time of massive creative output, Beethoven began to turn inward as he also became increasingly distraught over Napoleon's occupation of Vienna, as well as the onslaught of the deafness that caused him to retreat from the stage and the world. This is the Sonata in F-sharp major, which will mark the end of that style period in the talk today. By the time of the third style period, approximately 1816 to 1827, the Napoleonic nightmare in Vienna was over. Although there was no longer fear of invasion by the French, the Viennese government became increasingly restrictive. Beethoven, keenly responsive to his surroundings, found the new regime oppressive and untrusted and unsuited to the creative energy of creating new music. His personal life was further complicated by the death of one of his brothers, Caspar Karl, that left Beethoven as guardian of his young nephew, who was only 9 years old. Beethoven was really in no condition to take on learning to be a parent at this point in his life. Following a hiatus of 5 years, Beethoven's late works are all created in total deafness. In a sense, he is free from material hearing and is now poised to create some of the most imaginative and creative music ever composed by anyone, including the late string quartets, the last 5 piano sonatas, the great Missa Solemnis, and of course, Symphony No.9, the Ode to Joy. This is music that to this day presents even the finest musicians the challenge of understanding and executing the otherworldly characteristics of these phenomenal masterpieces. This is indeed a realm of music beyond the mundane life experience. This is like exploring outer space. In summary, style period 1 is the imitative period, where Beethoven is absorbing the classic traditions. Style period number 2 is when he expresses outward exuberance and the revolutionary spirit is in full force. Style period number 3 is more introspective and deeply spiritual. So now, let's begin when our master enters Vienna. He would have looked very much like this, albeit no gray hair, when he entered Vienna. He is a powerful, mighty force in this diminutive human being, Beethoven. So, what I would like to share with you is what happened on the day that Beethoven came to Vienna. He had initially wanted to come to study with Mozart, and unfortunately he came to Vienna right before his mother died. And so he was called back to Bonn to take care of family business and missed the opportunity to study with Mozart. So a couple of years later, when everything was settled down with the family, he came back to Vienna and spent the rest of his life as one of the major compositional forces in the country and in the city of Vienna. When Beethoven would enter the court, he was not known as a composer as much as he was a pianist. I mentioned earlier my great piano teacher, Harold Logan, and he gave me this book. It's called The Great Pianists, From Mozart to the Present, by Harold C. Schomburg. He was the music critic for the New York Times. This book is still available, and I, again, find his insights invaluable in helping us to learn about the composers and the pianists of the time. The title of this chapter on Beethoven is called String Snapper, Hands on High. That pretty much sums it up. In many things, Beethoven was ahead of his time, and so was his piano playing. It had unprecedented power, personality, and emotional appeal. In many respects, he can be considered the first romantic pianist, the one who broke all of the laws in the name of expression. However, he not only broke laws, he broke pianos. He broke piano strings. He was the one who thought orchestrally and achieved orchestral effects on the piano. In that, he was alone in his day, and his like was not to be seen again until the maturity of the great virtuoso pianist of the 19th century, Franz Liszt. But it was piano playing that raises a few questions. Why, for instance, is Beethoven's own piano music so relatively conservative, not to say old-fashioned, in its layout, in other words, in its structure? He followed in the tradition of the great masters Haydn and Mozart. But what was different, his sonatas are not necessarily conceived in terms of the piano, the instrument per se, but in terms of an idea expressed in form. Some of his piano writing can be frightfully difficult, but it is not pianistic. He is thinking orchestrally and in some cases thinking like a string quartet. It was in 1792, the year after Mozart died, that the short, homely Beethoven exploded over Vienna. His playing, and it was as a pianist, not as a composer, that he made his initial impact, was overwhelming. And it was overwhelming, not so much because Beethoven was a great virtuoso, which he probably wasn't, but because he had an ocean-like surge and depth that made all other playing sound like the trickle of a rivulet. All Vienna realized it was up against something new, something elemental, a primal, impolite force that without unparalleled harmonic daring and disrespect for the niceties, he would swarm all over the piano with complete confidence and freedom, storming the most distant keys, swinging through the most abstruse modulation. Everybody was struck by Beethoven's fiery expression. So Addison played for you the first movement of the Opus 10 piano sonata in C minor. I'm just going to play the introduction of the Pathétique sonata for you. Just imagine you are in court and you are at a very formal function and you are used to having music played in the background, and here comes Beethoven storming into the room, and everybody is completely thrown off by this startling impact of this man who is not very charismatic in the sense of being a good-looking individual like Franz Liszt was, but there was something about the power that absolutely transcended the visual of Beethoven. So imagine that you are seated very politely and ready for a nice little concert, and suddenly Beethoven enters the room. He's off to the races. But can you imagine just hearing that introduction that absolutely takes over and completely commands your full attention? You can imagine everybody looking around the room thinking, what am I supposed to think? What am I supposed to do when I hear music like that? And that's Beethoven, the revolutionary. Absolutely, fully forces you to get into his world and take you into a different place. I mentioned that Beethoven is being celebrated all over the world. We also know about COVID-19 and what it has done to concerts around the world. I have here the announcement of the extraordinary Beethoven Celebration that was to have taken place in Carnegie Hall. This says it all. Just this one announcement. 2 complete symphony cycles to have taken place. Then we go over to the complete piano sonatas, all 32 of them performed by some of the greatest masters of all time. Sir Andras Schiff, Mitsuko Ushida, Yefim Bronfman, Igor Levit, Emanuel X, Maurizio Pollini, Evgeny Kissin, and so on. Extraordinary things that were to have happened. We can only hope and pray that we will get a chance to celebrate this great, extraordinary musician. Then we have the complete string quartets cycle to be performed at Carnegie Hall. Then we have the complete piano trios, including Yo-Yo Ma, Emanuel X, and Leonidas Kavakos, and so on and so on. And of course, what it was going to be the apex of all of this was all together a global ode to joy. Conductor Marin Alsop leads performances of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony on 5 continents with 8 renowned orchestras as part of All Together, a global ode to joy, a year-long global creative learning project. Partners will reimagine the concert experience for their communities, presenting newly created works alongside the music of Beethoven, performed by artists from their region. As part of each performance, Ode to Joy will be translated into the local language. This is one of the greatest concert halls in the entire world. Everybody knows Carnegie Hall. And here we are at this moment, not able to enjoy this incredible celebration at this time. In the spirit of sharing a live concert performance, I would like to now delve into one of the hidden gems of the repertoire. Beethoven wrote 32 piano sonatas. That is over 600 pages of music just for piano sonatas. This is volume 2. We all missed out on celebrating the great master in 2020, with concerts scheduled all over the world. If anyone is familiar with his 32 sonatas for piano, the most familiar ones that come to mind have descriptive titles such as Pathétique, Moonlight, Waldstein, Appassionata, and Tempest. As a musician who has spent my entire life in music, discovering the music of Beethoven over and over again, it is somewhat like an explorer discovering a new world. We as musicians or interpreters are always searching for the new discoveries of music, and Beethoven's music is full of those opportunities of acting like an explorer and then sharing it as an interpreter with all of you. Although all of Beethoven's 32 piano sonatas are seeped in the tradition of classic music, that of Haydn and Mozart. Mozart's right here along with me and Beethoven, by being called sonata. In the 18th century classic tradition, these pieces, like symphonies, string quartets, piano trios, and so on, are always a multi-structure piece. They are divided into sections, large sections, called movements. Growing up at the end of the classic period of music, at the end of the 18th century, Beethoven poured his revolutionary and innovative romantic spirit into the prevailing forms of the day, like the metaphor of pouring new wine into old bottles. As I've mentioned before, my friend Beethoven here, this is his real hair. It is not that of the 18th century norm of wearing a wig. Each of Beethoven's 32 masterpieces written for the piano are clearly anchored in this classic tradition of the existing forms. But then Beethoven pushes their boundaries to the extreme with his expressive and powerful music. Each sonata forges a unique path, thus fulfilling Beethoven's characteristic of dramatic contrast and powerful music, carrying us into the realm of the unexpected, like an explorer discovering the new world. At the same time, he is hanging tight to the vestiges of the classic tradition of his predecessors. The sonata that I'm going to share with you today is simply titled Sonata number 24 in F-sharp major, Opus 78, dedicated to Theresa von Brunswick. So before you even hear a note, much information is contained at the very beginning of this sonata. That's what I learned by simply looking at the title and the dedication, the number, and the key. Number 24 and Opus 78, or work number 78, both indicate that this is a relatively late composition at the end of the second style period of 3. This piece was composed precisely in 1809. Preceding this sonata are all of the above titled sonatas, including Pathétique, Tempest, and so on. Now, the key of F-sharp major is a highly unusual choice for a key. This key that contains 6 sharps in the key signature alerts me immediately to expect something very different, i.e., a key to the unexpected. In music, there are 24 different choices for keys, and most music uses a maximum of 4 sharps and 4 flats in the key signature. Composers like Beethoven make a very conscious decision about the choice of a key for each composition, as the choice of key is closely linked to the expressive message of the music, such as the choice of C minor, where Beethoven uses this key of C minor for the Pathétique Sonata and Symphony No. 5, both with characteristics of being very stormy and powerful. Then there's the key of C sharp minor, which has 4 sharps. This is the choice of key for the Moonlight Sonata, which is deeply introspective and melancholic. In this particular case, Beethoven chooses the bright key of F-sharp major, the only piano sonata in that extraordinarily unusual key. Then I mentioned the dedication to Theresa von Brunswick, a Hungarian countess who is one of the candidates for the object of the immortal beloved letter. Of interest to note, this countess lived a long life from 1775 to 1861. She also was the founder of nursery schools in Hungary. She also was a piano student of Beethoven, and therefore she was the dedication. So, as a musician opening the score to the music, I am immediately interested in entering into the realm of this music. I am already intrigued to enter this new world. And then, as I page through the sonata to get a sense of the task ahead of interpreting the music, I take note of the following 2 surprises again, without even playing one note yet. The first surprise is that there are only 10 pages to this sonata, remembering that Beethoven wrote over 600 pages for his 32 sonatas. Therefore, this sonata averages 1 page per minute. That is extremely short for Beethoven. The second surprise is that there are only 2 movements, or dramatic big sections. He omits the characteristic contrasting slow movement and the minuet or scherzo movement. So again, being very economical in his use of the traditional form of a sonata. At this point, I can't wait to see what Beethoven is up to with this extraordinary sonata in F-sharp major. Let me now give you a brief overview of what we can expect when Lindsay performs the complete sonata for you. In the first movement, listen for a very abridged sonata form. He uses a very short introduction entitled Adagio cantabile, which literally means slow and singing, just like the slow movement of the Pathétique Sonata that I used to close lecture number 1. Beethoven immediately establishes the overall mood with a hymn-like sonority that sounds like this. That's it for the introduction. Then he has an extremely unusual exposition, which is a very important part of sonata form, being divided into exposition, development, and recapitulation. Theme 1 is usually robust and strong and assertive. This one, however, is marked dolce or gentle, and it is lyrical or song-like. It has a recognizable tune that holds the entire movement together. It is a clear melody on the top that dominates the entire first movement, and it sounds like this. So very gentle and very song-like. So in the exposition, we have theme 1 that is only a very short 4 measures. We have a bridge that connects to theme 2, and it is twice as long. Then we have theme 2 that is 12 measures long, and a closing that is 10 measures long. This whole balance is way off. It has quite unusual proportions. Everything evolves quite quickly and elegantly at the same time. The development section uses primarily this recognizable theme 1 or fragments of it. Note the ending chords of the first movement. It is unmistakable. It punctuates our now familiar fate motive, or short, 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 long. It comes at the end of this lyricism and it sounds like this. You cannot miss the fate motive that he inserts right there at the end of this very lyrical melody and first movement. Then he goes right on to the second movement, and for a musician, this is like, what the heck is happening here? This is a whole new world. He starts with this chord. After we hear this, we now hear this. It's like, what is that? So that is Beethoven making an extraordinary harmonic message with a augmented 6th chord, a very unstable chord that is used for moving effortlessly from one key area to another. In those days, this would have been considered utterly shocking, but nothing is shocking to our friend Beethoven. The second movement is entitled Allegro Vivace, which means fast and lively. He continues in the key of F sharp major in a humorous and lighthearted, minimalistic melodic idea. And minimalistic meaning like this. Just 3 notes, and then followed by a rest, and then a little answer. So that is the characteristic humorous little tune that dominates the second movement. Again, it sounds like this. Very catchy. And then he does something that is very typical of Beethoven. He takes the smallest melodic idea, in this case, 2 notes, and we hear these 2 notes well over 100 times in this very short piece. We have 2 notes that go like this. And so on. So he uses this little 2-note idea, this little nugget of music to expand this piece and give us pure fun and pure humor. Beethoven is having fun. Following the classic tradition, Beethoven pokes fun at the rondo form with its characteristic fast-paced recurring tune, that little one that goes da-da-dum, sometimes played high, sometimes played low, always with good humor throughout. The message is, enjoy the ride. Pianist Lindsay Garretson will now perform this effervescent gem by Beethoven. Many of you will recognize Lindsay as an extraordinary pianist familiar to Principia audiences since the age of 4 when she appeared on the stage of Cox Auditorium 3 decades ago. A graduate of the college in 2008, Lindsay then pursued her master's degree at Yale School of Music, where she also served on the staff there before completing her doctorate at the University of Miami in 2020. An internationally recognized artist, she gave her Carnegie Hall debut in 2019 and was to do a world concert tour premiering and performing the works of Australian composer Carl Vine, all called to an abrupt halt in March of 2020. I make that connection for Carnegie Hall because of the number of concerts that had to be called off to celebrate Beethoven, the great master. So we will have a performer who has performed in Carnegie Hall performing for you. On her tour, Lindsay was to have performed this particular Beethoven sonata. So she is now very happy to share it with you now. Let's welcome and enjoy Lindsay Garretson performing the Sonata in F sharp major by Beethoven at the peak of his creative energy at the culmination of the second style period. So I'm going to backtrack for just a moment, and we're going to talk about miniature pieces. There are so many exquisite miniatures. Of course, we all know freelance, and we all have experienced perhaps some of the little pieces along the way, such as his bagatelles. I'm going to share two pieces with you. I'm going to play freelance, because how can you talk about Beethoven and not talk about the famous letter? In addition to Heiligenstadt Testament letter, he also wrote a letter to his immortal beloved. It is still not known for sure who that immortal beloved is. Many of you have seen the movie entitled Immortal Beloved, and in it is an extraordinary tribute to Beethoven. If you just close your eyes and listen to the music, it is incredible, the inspiration of the music that is selected for that movie. Some people have trouble with the content of the movie, but Beethoven was a difficult person, and some of it, for dramatic purposes, of course, is exaggerated, but on the other hand, we hear the constant thread of this tremendous creative output juxtaposed against the human life that he experienced, his struggles, his agonies, his imperfections. But the great thing about the immortal beloved is that he had tremendous reverence for woman and womanhood. He always had a woman in his life, but he never had the woman that he sought after all his life. The best place to find this woman that he sought, as he says in Immortal Beloved, is a thorough experience and immersion in his great and only opera, Fidelio. And in it, you see firsthand, experience the great triumph and the great victory, the great courage of the woman, the heroine of the opera, who risks her life to protect her husband. That is the woman that Beethoven sought. Along the way, he wrote, in addition to music, this letter entitled The Immortal Beloved, that says, "My angel, my all, my very self, only a few words today, and that with pencil, with yours. Not till tomorrow will my lodgings be definitely determined upon. What a useless waste of time. Why this deep sorrow when necessity speaks? Can our love endure except through sacrifices? Through not demanding everything from one another? Can you change the fact that you are not wholly mine?" And so the letter goes on. One of the pieces that kind of symbolizes his love of womanhood that we know so well as pianists, of course, is freelance. I'll play just a little bit of For Elise. So that is just a taste of the famous For Elise. Now I'd like to have one of my younger students play for you an example of a piece that young children love to play, and it's entitled Bagatelle, which is just basically a little song, a little story. Here is Lucas Wang, who is age 11. Thank you, Lucas. It is so much fun to teach young people, and I have spent the last 60 years teaching young people and sharing my love of Beethoven plus all of the other composers with them. Lucas has had the opportunity to perform several little mini concerts already, so when he has completed, say, 4 or 5 pieces, then he gets to share them with an audience, and I am so proud of his progress. Let's advance now to near the end of Beethoven's life. I think that this is really the end when I am now talking about the funeral oration for Ludwig van Beethoven. And I'm doing that because it's an enormous tribute to who he was and how much he was loved and revered and recognized for his tremendous gifts to all mankind, even at that point in his life. And this was 1827. At the time of his funeral, it's been reported that there were anywhere from 15,000 to 20,000 people in attendance in Vienna. There were extraordinary pallbearers. There was an extraordinary celebration of his great music, but of all the tributes, there was this great gripping oration by Grillparzer, a poet of the time. Grillparzer's oration already gives testament to Beethoven's recognition, the recognition of who he was. Grillparzer immortalized him as, quote, the hero of verse in German speech and language, the last master of tuneful song, the organ of soulful concord, the heir of Handel's and Bach's, of Haydn's and Mozart's immortal fame. He observed that Beethoven, quote, was an artist, and all that was his through art alone. Remember the Heiligenstadt Testament of 25 years before, in which he commits his life from that point on to his art, to his music, to his creating music for all of us for generations to come. Grillparzer says he was a man as well. Not just the difficult man I described earlier. He was a man in every sense, in the highest sense of manhood. Because he withdrew from the world, they called him a man-hater. And because he held aloof from sentimentality, unfeeling. One who knows himself heart of heart does not shrink. The finest points are those most easily blunted and bent or broken. An excess of sensitiveness avoids a show of feeling. He fled the world because in the whole range of his loving nature, he found no weapon to oppose it. He withdrew from mankind after he had given them his all and received nothing in return. He dwelt alone because he found no second self. But in the end, his heart beat warm for all men, in fatherly affection for his kindred, for the world his all, and his heart's blood. He whom you mourn stands from now onward among the great of all ages, inviolate forever. Return homeward, therefore, in sorrow, yet resigned. And should you ever, in times to come, feel the overpowering might of his creations like an onrushing storm, when your mounting ecstasy overflows in the midst of a generation yet unborn, then remember this hour and think, we were there when they buried him, and when he died, we wept. Those are the words of somebody who foresaw what we would be experiencing now, 250 years later. I mentioned earlier that his music is extremely powerful, can be extremely tragic, but it also can be some of the most utterly divine music ever written. And I can honestly say, if there is one last music I would want to hear in my life, it is the slow movement, the second movement of the great Piano Concerto No. 5, The Emperor. In it is some of the most sublime music ever penned by anybody in any form. I'm going to just play what the orchestra plays and then notice what happens. It sets the stage for this utterly divine flow of triplets from the solo pianist. Ironically, Beethoven premiered this piece, and at the time, he couldn't hear a note that he was playing. So here is, in my opinion, some of the most beautiful music ever penned by anybody. Some of you have had the opportunity to meet many great musicians along the way, performers, and I've had the great, extraordinary opportunity to get to know the formidable Leif Ove Ansnes. And if you want to find a great resource for listening to all of the Beethoven piano concertos, I highly recommend Leif Ove Ansnes. In 2015, he received BBC's award-winning for the Pianist Stunning Concertos, win our Recording of the Year. So Leif Ove Ansnes, tremendous insight into the music and piano concertos of Beethoven. Now that brings us to a close, and of course you can't have Beethoven without his Ode to Joy. Beethoven's pillar of music that towers above all the others is his Ninth Symphony, the work that was chosen to celebrate the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Throughout this monumental symphony that depicts the trials and challenges of existence, as well as its heavenly and inspiring beauty and serenity, we all celebrate victory and freedom with the jubilant Ode to Joy in the concluding movement. we all know that the concluding movement goes like this. That tune runs throughout the last movement and brings, through its variations and its various treatments, carries us to this tremendous sense of victory 74 minutes after the first note. I'm mentioning 74 minutes because, ironically, that is the time for CDs. And the reason that CDs can play for 74 minutes is because Sony came up with a CD that could play the entire Ninth Symphony. That's why CDs are 74 minutes long. So no other symphony since the time of its composition has been so often symbolically linked to the world's repeated efforts at establishing freedom for all mankind. Perhaps we will sing and hear great performances of the Ode to Joy, Symphony No. 9, when we are on the other end of this pandemic. Its majestic strains were heard at most Olympic Games during the second half of the 20th century. Its melodies have inspired creation of Europe's anthem, adapted by the great Austrian conductor Herbert von Karajan in 1972, the national anthem of Rhodesia, the EU anthem. Its power, comfort, and promise of healing was played the last night of the Proms concerts held in London after 9/11 with American conductor Leonard Bernstein, to name but a few of the occasions for the Symphony No. 9. We all look forward to hearing that very soon as we celebrate, hopefully soon, the end of this pandemic. One of the great performances of Ode to Joy is by a performance that was at the Berlin Wall. It is called Ode to Freedom. Again, the bringing together of this particular set of musicians in this particular circumstance in history, and with the great American conductor Leonard Bernstein. Leonard Bernstein had come out of retirement when he was asked to conduct the symphony that brought together the Allied forces in Berlin. So this concert occurred in Christmas of 1989, and it was just less than a year later that Leonard Bernstein himself passes away. He was extremely ill at this time, but he felt such a calling himself, just like Beethoven rose above his deafness to compose this great masterpiece. Leonard Bernstein took the stage, and you would never, ever know that he was ill. In the extraordinary lively scherzo, he is literally bouncing up and down on the stage, and never a note in front of him, never a sign of human weakness. Absolutely an extraordinary monument of great performances to go along with this milestone in music, the Ninth Symphony. So with that, we will be closing today's talk. And it is so important for us to know that it is music that is going to be embracing all of us millions. And as he says, he wants us to all be united as one and lifted together in one bond of humanity as we sing the Ode to Joy together. So in modern day, there have been, like Beethoven did at the time when he was a pianist, he improvised a lot. And so obviously composers have taken this tune and have turned it into wonderful creative products themselves. And for example, there is a composer by the name of Danny Calhoun who has taken this tune and turned it into an extraordinary fantasy. I'm just going to play the first part of it to celebrate the Ode to Joy. for being with me today as you have experienced something of my journey through life with my lifetime partner, Ludwig van Beethoven. It is hard to imagine life without Beethoven. It is my great hope that you too will find great meaning and inspiration from experiencing the music of this giant in the history of mankind. There is nothing on earth more powerful than hearing a glorious rendition of the Ode to Joy with its ecstatic vision of all men as brothers. All men as brothers. This indeed is the timeless message of all of Beethoven's music.